So good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us with this punctuality. My name is Laura Gomez Climent, and I'm part of the Multilateral Organizations Department at ICEX, located at Madrid on the headquarters. And on behalf of ICEX, I would like to give you a very warm welcome. It's very gratifying to find this level of participation in one of our activities. We have more than 35 business or startups connected that sign up for this activity. So thank you very much. Before I start, I would like to thank especially Casa Asia for coming to us on the first place and proposing to jointly organize this seminar. Also to the ADB Venture Fund for their interest in connecting with the Spanish startups, and especially to Soundia Kalaspati, who kindly accepted our invitation to participate here, and she's connecting from Sydney. And of course, thank you all Spanish entrepreneurs for attending this seminar. Today, as you know, we are presenting the ADB Venture Fund that was established this year, earlier this year in January, by the Asian Development Bank. And it was created with the aim to invest in companies offering impact technology solutions that contribute to the SDG achievement in the Asian Pacific region. The ADB Fund has also 4 sectoral labs that aims to connect the regional demand for clean tech, fintech, agri-tech, and health tech to best-in-class technology companies from all over the world, including the Spanish companies. And that's why we are organizing this seminar today. But I don't want to talk more about that because Ms. Samia will cover the details with greater depth later on. But before before getting down into it, for those that doesn't know us, I would like to give you some information about what we do. We are a team that is based partly in Madrid, but also in Brussels, Manila, and Washington, covering different financial institutions, mainly the European Commission external aid from Brussels. Manila is covering the ADB operations, and from Washington, our colleagues are covering the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. Through our activities, what we want is to bring information to the Spanish companies about the business opportunities linked to the multilateral financing. But we also provide some services to support them to tap into these business opportunities. As I said, we are following up on the ADB funding, and my colleague Jose Barea, who is also connected to this session, he will be very happy to help you drive your way through the bank. Well, before more delay, I will want to pass the word on to Amadeo Gensana. He's the director of the Economic and Business Area at Casa Asia. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Laura, and thank you for thanks to ICEX and also to ADB for actually organizing together with us this presentation on the actually just ADB, this new ADB program that I think it will be of interest for many startups in Spain. Actually, for those who doesn't know us, Casa Asia is a public institution depending on the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, mainly together with the city halls of Barcelona and Madrid, mainly just devoted to develop many different projects with Asian countries in different fields, in the field of economy, of business, but also in the field of culture, the field of education. So we were established 19 years ago. Actually, next year will be over just 20th anniversary. And well, basically, we are managing just different European programs also, and we'll also try to, just address all the information for the companies in order to do business in Asia. Just some remarks about starting this presentation. First of all, as a general and a global context, I think that Asia will be hardly hit by coronavirus, but probably not as bad as Europe or as the United States. If we can see actually at the number of cases, for instance, basically is much more just is lower than the cases that we have witnessed in Europe, for instance, 2.6 million for the United States. But of course, I mean, there will be just some regions, especially sub-regions, especially India, that will be hardly hit. And we have to take this into consideration because there are many risks, like, for instance, just increasing poverty in those countries. Second remark, I think that actually, well, Spanish startups doesn't know that much about the Asian markets, but I think it's a very good place to go. Although the distance is huge, and also there are many cultural differences. We have witnessed in recent years actually a growing number of middle class, of people of middle class actually just raging in Asia. In 1990, for instance, around the 75% of the middle class of the world was based in Europe, in USA, and now, for instance, just 40% of the middle class is based only in China and India. So it's a good place to scale technologies. It's a good place also to look for funding. And I think there are many vibrant, actually, just startup ecosystems in Asia, not only in China. We know quite well that the case of China, Shenzhen, for instance, but especially in other countries like, for instance, India, Malaysia, Thailand, or Indonesia, or even the Philippines that have, as I said before, just very good well-started ecosystems. And my third remark would be about just ADB, that has a long history in working with developing countries in Asia, mainly in infrastructure projects. But we welcome very much this new initiative, this ADB Ventures initiatives, because actually, well, ADB has a huge network of labs, of contacts, and also financial resources, actually, to help companies to get especially into well, Southeast Asia and South Asia. So we welcome very much this initiative from Spain, and we hope that actually just many Spanish companies will be interested in the initiative, and hopefully some of those companies will also actually join this ADB Ventures initiative. So that's all from my side. Thanks again to ESEX and to ADB for this opportunity, and I hope actually this webinar is interesting for you.
Thank you very much, Amadeo. Now it's time to hear from you. Samia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Sure. Give me 2 minutes. I will share my presentation.
Yes, Sonia, please go ahead. Sorry about the delay. I had to change some of the settings.
Okay, sure. No worries. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Firstly, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak and give you a bit of insight around ADB Ventures. Just to echo what my colleagues have said, COVID-19 has been indeed an interesting disruptor, but I think there are opportunities, particularly for startups and those coming into or interested in partnering with Asian firms and regions and partners such as the Asian Development Bank. Today, I will talk to you a little bit about ADB Ventures, who we are and how we sit within the context of ADB. I know it might seem a little far off being in Spain, but ADB has a lot of European shareholders per se. Spain, most of the Nordics, Eastern, Western Germany, all of the sort of the main counterparts in Asia, America. So it's a very global, globally sort of networked organization. I'll go through a little bit about that and provide a bit more detail. So who are we? How does ADB Ventures fit into things? We're part of the private sector operations department. So if you think about the World Bank, you have the IFC, the World Bank. In the Asian Development Bank, the private sector sort of support and investment arm is integrated within the Asian Development Bank. And we have 4 teams, really, specialist departments, which complement our main department, which looks at investment in infrastructure, financial institutions, and special funds. So the business development team, which ADB Ventures sits under, was really driven from a couple of things. The first is typically ADB in the past, the private sector operations department has invested in larger scale investments, infrastructure, large sort of hydro, renewables. But I think there's a recognition, particularly in Asia Pacific, that there is a growing demand for financing startups, earlier stage companies. There's a huge but very fragmented ecosystem in Asia. There's a lot of Asian expats who have lived in Spain, who have lived in Europe, Australia, America, who are coming back to Asia Pacific to sort of capitalize on the growing opportunities. So the business development team and the ADB Ventures started because the private sector operations is trying to support that growing market. Why? For 2 reasons. It's a huge investment opportunity. Second, it has a lot of impact potential. So what we're trying to do is really target innovation. We're trying to target earlier stage companies. Yes, that means we take on a little bit more risk than the private sector operations normally would have. And that's really part and parcel of the ADB Ventures facility. So what we're trying to do with ADB Ventures is to support the region and really become a leading impact technology investment platform. Impact tech is a term that's thrown around a lot, but what we mean and what we see is that impact investment, particularly in Asia Pacific, is being driven through technology-enabled solutions. And I'll go through what those specific terms mean and what we mean by impact tech in my next slides. But what we're trying to do is really target SDG goals. At the moment, we're in phase 1. So we were approved under the Asian Development Bank in January earlier this year. We met first close, and I'll talk about that in a short while. But we're really in setup and launch phases. And we're focusing on climate and gender impact through our investments and our technical assistance. Eventually, we will scale across Asia to cover all of the Asian regions from Kiribati in the Pacific right through to sort of Mongolia and our target regions in Southeast Asia and South Asia. We are focused on climate and gender, but as we scale and grow and sort of incorporate lessons learned and understand the market and have sort of collaboration partners increase, we will be looking to expand to new SDG themes. And we're really looking into sort of become a leading platform for impact tech investments and a platform by sort of 2025, 2030. So who are we and what are we trying to do? ADB Ventures, I think first and foremost, it really is a patient venture capital platform. There are a myriad of venture capital firms, private equity firms, accelerators, and startups. But what we're trying to do is provide an end-to-end solution for companies, startup or in growth phases in Asia. We have a funnel approach which connects. Basically, it reduces. What we do is have a program to reduce market entry risks. We provide and enable a rapid sort of validation of solutions and business models through our seed program. And finally, we can also invest and provide patient capital. So let me allow me a few minutes just to go through each of these. The idea is that through our networks, including in Spain, and through our partners and ADB's vast network of corporate and public sector links, government, state-owned entities, corporate networks, venture capital co-financiers, DFIs. What we're trying to do is provide a support startups through a couple of cycles. So the first point is really to connect ADB Labs, and I'll provide some examples in subsequent slides. But we're trying to partner with leading accelerators to really connect global tech startups with large local adopters of their solutions. So those local adopters could be, as I mentioned, state-owned entities, government utilities, local banks, or corporate, commercial sort of partners and other corporate private sector players. And the idea is to really, through ADB's networks and ADB's regional and public sector departments, enable a facilitation between startups who ordinarily would have no idea where to start or where to go. So if you're a Spanish startup looking to expand into Southeast Asia or China or India, it's quite a difficult and daunting task. So what we're trying to do is simplify that process and ensure that the companies and the adopters of their potential solutions are put in front of each other and can have a commercially viable discussion to see whether a pilot or a contract could come out of that. And that sets us up for the next phase, which is the seed. So the seed program, we have a program that allows us to provide around up to sort of 200,000, between 20,000 to 200,000 of reimbursable grants for companies entering a market. It could be a lower income country, it could be a new market, it could be anywhere from sort of Thailand to Laos. And the idea is to set up a pilot to test and reduce the market entry risks for startups, to allow them to expand, to make the connections, and put forward a pilot to see whether their solution will work in the country. We also have ADB Ventures Fund 1. We do provide patient capital. The fund is expected to capitalize at 60 mil, and we can invest up to 4 million in one ticket size for early stage and startups and early stage growth companies. The fund can also hold up to 10 years if needed. So that's what we mean by patient venture capital. We can hold up to 10 years to allow a company to go through a couple of business cycles, and we will provide support, access to networks, etc., through ADB's networks. So let me elaborate a little bit on each of those particular components of the program. A startup can actually come into the program at the lab stage, the seed stage, or the fund stage, but not necessarily in a linear fashion. So there are some companies that we have in our pipeline that have gone straight eligible, and therefore are we're discussing sort of direct equity investment. There are some companies that we'd like to see and support them to sort of test their solution and see how that will work, and therefore they're getting seed funding. And there are other companies that we're seeing in our pipeline that we could potentially introduce to adopters of solutions, for example, water utility or a bank, and we will be supporting them to go through our labs program. Okay, let me just look to the next slide. So just quickly on our labs program, what we're trying to do is really to reduce market entry risks for startups. As I mentioned, it's quite daunting for companies to come into Asia Pacific. If you're a Spanish startup, where do you start? If you want to enter Thailand, how do you get around? How do you maneuver through sort of the regulatory framework? How do you set up a JV? How do you sort of find a local partner? So the labs program is really trying to address some of those issues. What it means is we map the industry demand. So for clean tech, agri-tech, fintech, and health tech, we map the industry demand in Asia together with our corporates. For example, in sustainable tourism or in clean energy and energy efficiency, in water efficiency, we'll work with sort of leading entities, for example, water utilities in a particular region, and say, what are your biggest pain points? Garner those sort of into a problem statement. And then what we'll do is source best-in-class solutions from around the world with our partners, including Spanish partners. And from there, we will sort of go through a selection process to identify which companies would have the solutions that could potentially support those problem statements, which we mapped out. And then we can support through a pilot to validate the solutions. And therefore, at the end of this process, the company and the adopter of the solution are very aware of sort of the market risks, the regulatory risks. They're in touch with each other, and the company also has potential financing as well. So that's the labs. And we have 3 that are ongoing at the moment. Sustainable travel. So in that case, we were working with the Pacific Asia Tourism Association, PATA, to sort of identify, particularly with large tourist operators, how they could potentially reduce their climate footprint, their energy efficiency. And through that program, we've identified certain startups that could support sustainable tourism. Similarly, we're doing a program for energy, energy efficiency in buildings, smart cities, and we're working with Imagine H2O on our Water Lab Asia program as well. So a little bit about the investment fund 1. So the fund is to be capitalized at 60 mil, but we met first close despite COVID at the end of Q1 2020, and we have 50 mil. So why so small? Why not, with the Asian Development Bank? Why wouldn't we go for, a 500 million fund? The very simple reason is that we want to start small. We want to work with our partners. We want to be very strategic in how we support our startups. And so through this process, we are starting small and building up to be a much larger platform. The ADB Venture facility can include multiple investment funds, and this is the first one. So by September 30, which is final close, we will be able to provide 60 mil of equity and quasi-equity financing. It is complemented by a technical assistance piece, which includes the labs and the CE program that I mentioned. Last 2 years, we've had what ADB calls project preparation. And that's really technical assistance to support sort of the fund design, the development of the pipeline, engagement with local sort of counterparts and sort of accelerators and VCs in order to develop the pipeline. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to sort of post this webinar, is so that we could reach out to sort of Spanish companies who are interested also in entering our target regions. There's a lot of what we call tech transfer from what we call North-South. So from the European region that could benefit and hugely generate impact within Southeast Asia and South Asia in Asia. And I think that's something that we're trying to facilitate through Fund 1 as well. Okay. So in terms of our targets, I mentioned that we will be an all-encompassing SDG platform, but for Fund 1, we're looking at really climate and gender impact. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see that what we're trying to do is target impact initially in Southeast Asia. So 50% of our focus will be in Southeast Asia. That includes the Mekong region, so Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia. 30% will be in South Asia, so Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, and then other emerging Asia, 20% opportunistically. So if there's a great opportunity that's coming up in PNG, we'll have a look at that and see whether it fits our criteria. All of our investments, 80% of them will have a climate and 75% a gender impact. So you can see there's a huge overlap between gender and climate. That's not lip service, it's based on demand. So we can really see that by addressing climate, and I'll go through what I mean by climate. By addressing climate and by addressing gender, we are doing 2 things. The first is we're banking on investable opportunities and impact tech solutions that are currently being missed out in the market. The second is that we're generating huge impact. And that's something that Amadeo mentioned on. Asia's got hit by COVID, but there's a huge lot of opportunity that we're trying to capitalize on. So Fund 1, what are we looking for? Our investment targets are really, and those companies that are in growth stages and wanting to enter Asia Pacific in Southeast Asia and South Asia. We are looking for impact tech as we define it, which is really tech-enabled solutions. and business models, and ones that aren't necessarily in a very specific niche market, but that are scalable and replicable. Ideally with a product in the market or existing revenue or very near to positive unit costs with limited sort of R&D risk. We're looking at pre-Series A, Series A, and early growth investment. So as I mentioned, we can invest up to 4 million, but the average ticket size will be between sort of 1.5 to 2 million. We are looking for startups and for companies that are seeking equity funding between 12 to 18 months. And ADB Ventures will co-invest with leading early stage investors. So we typically in an equity round won't take a lead position for a couple of reasons, including that we would like to facilitate particularly the startup to access other VC and private equity investors and debt investors hopefully in the future. And because we're so concessional, we don't want to crowd out the market there. Our focus, I mentioned clean tech, agri-tech, health tech, and fintech. Specifically what that means, and I'll go through this, clean energy, sustainable agriculture, inclusive financial technology, and inclusive healthcare. I've talked about the climate and gender impact and the fact that we are initially focusing on South Asia and Southeast Asia. And I think the reason why we are doing this as part of ADB Ventures is also so we could add some direct value. What does that mean? Firstly, we want to be a patient but active investor. ADB has 22 developing member countries. We have a lot of presence on the ground, staff, ADB networks, consultants sitting across every single country in Asia, in the country and or very connected to the country. So we want to really leverage those networks and support our potential pipeline of investees to sort of reduce their market risks and scale their businesses and hopefully generate a lot of impact. So that's really the sort of the key criteria for our fund. So on that, COVID-19, something that we're all impacted by, and I hope everyone on this webinar is nice and safe. But you know, it is a major disruptor, but we're taking a positive spin on it. It's leading to a whole host and emergence of new solutions. Amadeo mentioned some statistics already for the Asia Pacific region, but what we're seeing is already, since around earlier this year, Asia is shifting to what we call a new normal. We're already seeing huge shifts to contactless economies, but there are weaknesses. We're expecting between 1.7 to 2.5 trillion in terms of economic losses across Asia and Pacific. And of course, this disproportionately affects lower income populations, particularly those in the informal sector that we're estimating to be around 1.3 billion. And essentially, as you know, in Spain, how we work, travel, get healthcare, access finance, you know, go to the supermarket, everything is changing. So what we're also seeing in Asia is the innovation. Entrepreneurs are agile, they're developing new solutions, and that's so the new types of solutions within our clean tech, agri-tech, fintech, and health tech space is what we're seeing is an emergence of new solutions in supply chains, you know, particularly local supply chains, supporting to sort of rebuild the job market, physical distancing, social distancing, very inclusive financial services, so an increase in mobile contactless services, and sort of AI-based services to support remittances, for example, safe and resilient transport, a move away from sort of personal versus public transport, and then, of course, access to health. So an increase in solutions that are tech-enabled for universal health care, contactless healthcare, medical training, all that kind of stuff. So that's really exciting for us, and it fits very well into our scope for ADB Ventures. So despite the downturn, particularly in traditional venture capital and private equity that is now being funneled away from many sort of startups and growth companies, we're seeing an opportunity.
Sorry, Sam, yes, excuse me for interrupting you, but it seems like your microphone is touching your jacket and it makes a lot of noise, so some of the participants can hear you well. So if you can just take your microphone away from your jacket, maybe the sound gets better. Sorry to interrupt you.
Perfect. That's okay. Is that better?
Yeah, much better. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so just give me a few minutes to go through what we mean by the sectors. So for clean energy and clean tech, what we're really looking at is solutions that provide inclusive and resilient clean energy. And the reason for that is because there's a poor availability of products. It's not affordable. There's a willingness to pay and energy inefficiency. So a lot of people, around 200 million people, still lack access to basic electricity. They have very poor sources for for cooking and for clean energy. And of course, Asia has a huge pollution problem, as you heard in the news. Also look and resource efficiency. And the reason of operational inefficiency, there's financial barriers and policy barriers. So what we're trying to do is promote rapid increase in energy consumption from non-fossil fuel-based sources. And then the third is the circular economy. And this is really relevant, particularly for the Pacific. Asia Pacific has, more than 60% of the global share of FMCG sectors. So we really need to start pushing for low carbon and green development. But of course, there's limited financing. So that's what we mean by clean tech and clean energy. And we have a good pipeline. We have partners in China, we have partners in India, Australia, and we're looking for those types of clean tech solutions and clean energy solutions to come into Asia Pacific. The next is sustainable agriculture. There are three main problems that we see within Asia Pacific that we would like to address in terms of impact. The first is that with climate change, there is the availability of risk mitigation and adaptation technology, but not so much in our target regions. Agriculture still employs around 1/3 of Asia Pacific, and the region is heavily dependent on climate and natural resources. But agriculture with climate change is heavily vulnerable to sort of drought, natural disasters, floods. So what we're looking at is climate smart farming. The second pillar is supply chains. And again, this is something that we're seeing really increase in terms of the sector, particularly with COVID, that the system in Asia Pacific across many countries has a fragmented supply chain. There's a lack of technology, supply chain inefficiency, cold chain inefficiency. So there's a lot of opportunity to improve that. And we're looking for those types of impact tech solutions that can support localized, flexible, and transparent supply chain management and product diversification. And the last pillar is really sustainable inputs in food. There's limited land. There is limited sort of access to sustainable inputs for farmers. And in Asia Pacific, 43% of land is degraded, and at least 80% of water consumed by irrigation. So the growing population, which is growing at an alarmingly high rate, is really requiring sort of food and water usage in a much more sustainable, less carbon intensive way. So we're looking for those types of solutions within the sustainable inputs in food. So inclusive fintech, again, there are some problems here in terms of the region for lack of access and finance. There's not really a huge amount of identification, financial literacy. There's still a lot of sort of local banks have high collateral requirements, regulatory problems. There's lack of information infrastructure, data systems, and also a general sort of willingness to pay and affordability. And of course, high transaction costs. So what we're trying to do in terms of inclusive fintech is look at access to finance for the vulnerable. Asia Pacific is home to more than half of the world's unbanked, and this particularly includes women and the poor. We're looking for climate-related risk solutions, particularly those arising to the threat of climate-related natural disasters. We know that there's a lot of uninsurance issues. 4 in 5 people are affected by natural hazards in Asia. So we're looking at sort of microinsurance and climate insurance and climate risk products that are enabled through technology, particularly to scale across low-income populations. And then the third bucket is really innovative green financing. So there's still very much a limited availability of capital for smaller distributed solutions, novel technologies, and there's a green financing gap. I think in the slide I put down that there's 1.7 trillion a year gap. So we're looking for ways to make green financing smarter and have greater impact, and for scalability across that. The last is health tech. So again, this is something that's come up with COVID. And there's a lot of activity in this space, particularly around sort of medicines, equipment. But from our perspective, what we're seeing is that rather than taking sort of a short-term view on how to address health technology, including sort of the management of pandemics in the future, we would like to take a longer-term approach. So those 3 areas are really remote and last-mile healthcare, epidemics and infectious diseases, and promoting resilient healthcare. And these are driven by problems that we're seeing at the moment. And pre-COVID, these existed, and these sorts of systematic infrastructure challenges have led to sort of a much harder response to infectious diseases like COVID. And these include lack of access to health services, particularly in underserved rural slum areas, a lack of affordable and digital technology to support sort of to pandemic tracking, disease tracking, a lack of real-time and reliable data, particularly to monitor and respond, a lack of supply chain data, fragmentation, particularly within that supply chain data, and very limited local manufacturing. So we're still reliant on sort of other countries outside of Asia Pacific to provide particularly specialized medicines and products. So what we're trying with remote and last mile healthcare is really just to sort of support the new normal, that's what we're calling it, for low touch healthcare solutions, and that can be scaled. For epidemics and infectious diseases, we're looking at climate-related impacts, particularly, zoonotic diseases, increases in vector-borne diseases that come out of changing climate, waterborne diseases, pandemics. We're already seeing an impact on the air travel industry, and we've estimated that an airborne outbreak will cost the region up to 1.2 trillion. Let's see what the numbers say after COVID. But all the sorts of tech that's available there to support epidemic and infectious diseases is right up our alley as well. And then resilient healthcare, it's really just to support the health systems in Asia Pacific to become effective in terms of supply chains and distributed healthcare that can respond and prevent outbreaks, climate-led disasters, and basic infrastructure. So, given those sectors and our scope and the funnel that we can provide, support for startups entering into the Asia Pacific region through our labs program, seed program, and also provide patient equity. These are some of the types of companies in our investing pipeline. As I mentioned, our companies that we can invest in, they can be domiciled anywhere. So, for example, in Spain, so long as the impact is within our target regions of Southeast Asia and South Asia. And what we're trying to do is really look at the impact. And so you can see that the companies that I've put on the slide here, the origins are very varied. Korea, Thailand, India, Vietnam. We have a Spanish in the UK. We have a strong sort of set of pipeline coming from the Nordic region, from the Australian, American. And all those companies are wanting to enter the Asia Pacific because they see a bankable opportunity and or need some help to sort of enter the country and to sort of expand their businesses. So, the first company that I've put down, is a novel brick making system. Interesting. It reduces sort of, it increases productivity and improves labor conditions and the brick-making system is on a chemical and physical binding process, and we're working with that company to see how they can expand into South Asia. We also have a sustainable tourism. It's an interesting and very exciting platform. It's a marketplace, particularly for local tours, that connects sort of tourists with local tour guides, and particularly for women who, after their jobs, are available to sort of take the increasing sort of off the beaten track tourists to local places. It offers flexible hours and job opportunities, and this is a great example of what we mean by gender lens. We have an agri-clean tech company coming out of India that has a very proprietary thermal storage tech application for cold chain and logistics. It gives us up to 60% cost savings and has a huge impact, particularly on agricultural supply chains. A company coming out of Vietnam, it's a fintech. It's a very easy to use cloud-based ERP solution that allows businesses and farmers, particularly women, who often don't have collateral to secure against any financing. And it's a simple AI-driven credit scoring platform that is now being built right across the Mekong. So that's an example, again, of a tech solution, but also with a huge gender impact. And then we also have the last one, which is a Spanish and British company that is making sort of very, very great high-performing natural leather alternatives, particularly out of the Philippines. And they're about to enter mass production. They're a little bit bigger than sort of what a typical startup would be. But again, we're able to help them. We've connected them with several clients, and they're in the process right now of sort of leveraging ADB's networks to test their pilot out. So those are the types of example investees. You can see they're quite varied, but they do fit into our two primary categories. The first is they have a climate and gender impact, and the second is that they're in our target regions, which is Southeast Asia and South Asia. So the question I get asked a lot is, why ADB? I mean, don't we have venture capital and other private equity firms doing this? And the answer is yes, but not all of them have the networks to really provide value add for investees and investors. The team, the ADB Ventures team, has a huge amount of experience providing sort of seed venture capital private equity investments. We have throughout the team experience in designing and implementing 20 accelerators. We sit within ADB's private sector operations department, which has significant equity expertise, over 900 million of private equity investments since 2006 to 17, around 85% of investments rated successful. Throughout ADB's networks, we have, in all of our 22 countries, 600 utilities and large corporates, over 400 financial institutions, banks and funds as part of our corporates. These entities are either engaging with ADB to do business, are funded by ADB, or working together with ADB and governments to roll out and implement projects. So it's quite an extensive network. And of course, the keystone is that we have a huge investor and startup network. Already in our project preparation phase, we've evaluated over 2,000 startups, and we have partnerships with 30, actually a little bit more than that, leading VC funds and accelerators. So what we're looking at and what we're trying to leverage is this network, and that's something that we want part of our value add for all of our investees. So how can you connect with us? If there's a company that is a startup or an early stage company that meets our criteria, we have an inquiries website on our website, email on our website. For collaboration, we can do a couple of things, particularly through our labs program. We can provide support to co-finance proof of concept or a pilot. And we can also sort of support, and so long as we can demonstrate the impact of the business model. And all of this is part of our labs program. Again, it's on our website under labs. We have contacts in our ADB European representative office as well, which is headquartered in Frankfurt. But of course, the most direct way is to go to our website. So I'll stop there. And thank you so much for your time. And I really hope that was informative. ADB Ventures is also, it's exciting for us because it's a very new initiative within ADB. We are trying really hard to leverage ADB's networks, our reputation. We have AAA rating, our safeguards, and sort of the contacts. But we're foraying into taking a lot more risk and focusing on impact. And I think what is exciting for partners outside of the region is that it represents an opportunity to get into the region, to expand into the region. And that's something that I hope we'll see more of from Spain.
Sandhya, it was really interesting. We already have some minutes for questions. We don't have anyone yet, but I really invite you, all of the attendees, to submit your questions to Sandhya. Please address them to todos los participantes to make sure that we receive it. And in the meantime, I would like to ask you something. How would you? What will be your suggestion for the participants that are interested? Because they will be, I assume, really prepared to talk to you about their technology. But you mentioned that the focus of the fund will be on gender impact and climate impact. So I'm sure there will be a lot of people that will be able to build a case for the climate impact, but for the gender impact, it is quite tricky, especially because you mentioned that it has to, it has to be adapted to the context, and you are the one that are providing the knowledge and the expertise on the context. So does the ADB Bank provide any kind of support for these startups that may have the potential but don't have the experience and the expertise to build their case on how they will impact with on gender? So what do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, this is, coming from a commercial background, when I first got into the SDGs and impact, it's a very development-y term. So yes, a startup and a company should do one thing, which is to grow their business and not worry about how to quantify an SDG impact. So yes, we can support that. Climate is a little bit more clear-cut. Gender is, it's a bit more nuanced. Traditionally, gender has focused on having, for example, a female founder or someone on the board that's female. And of course, we do support that. Our take on gender is a little broader than that. It includes the solution that can support the customer, the distributor, and the consumer of the product. And the best example I can think of is the washing machine. So when the washing machine was invented, it was invented by men, but actually it was a game changer for women at that time. So you can see that the gender impact is broad ranging and it's a lot more nuanced. ADB has a very broad definition of gender, and we have a lot of a focus on gender, particularly because there's a lot of investment opportunity within this space. There was a PricewaterhouseCoopers report done a couple of years ago that showed that the she economy is actually missing out on nearly 1.8 trillion of bankable revenue. So if startups could think about tweaking their solutions, their marketing and their product to access sort of a gender equitable supplier, customer, distributor, and consumer base, it's also profitable to the startup. And that's really what we're looking at. And as part of our sort of a program and our discussion and our due diligence, we do work with our companies, recognizing that our companies are focused on getting their business off the ground and not necessarily quantifying their gender impact. So that's something that we definitely can provide support with.
Okay, thank you. There's a question that has come, and it's when will be the AgriLab be launched?
Yeah, the AgriLab. Yeah. So we are working through that right now, and the details should be on the web. And it's a process. We have certain partners in the region. So we're working, for example, the Future Food Asia, which is a leading sort of the sector expert in the region. And so it's ongoing. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but let me, I suggest that have a look at the website, adbventures.org. It's ongoing. We did have a program last year, but we will be continuing to support that program because it is a huge focus for us.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. There are no more questions, but my colleague Jose Barea, which is the part of the team that is based in Manila, he will want to also share something. So go ahead, Jose.
Well, good morning to everyone. This is Jose Barea. I'm the ADB liaison officer for Spain, and I'm based in Manila. First of all, thank you very much, Samja, for your excellent presentation, your key details on these ADB Ventures and how to approach the program, which I believe it is indeed very much necessary for the introduction of new technologies on key topics for development, topics that are always part of ADB developing projects. I just would like very quickly to put into context what we are talking about, rather a general contextualization, thinking mostly about the audience, these Spanish companies and Spanish professionals that are here that might not be fully aware of how ADB works, how this institution is actually developing businesses in the Asia and the Pacific. So for doing that, I'm going to paste here on the chat box. I'm going to paste here todos los asistentes. I'm going to paste here a couple of links for two documents that we have done in our office to work on the public window and the private window of the ADB. These documents are in Spanish, so it's just for the audience, so they can understand a little bit what we are talking about. But I would like to just send a couple of keynotes about what we are talking about from the perspective of this company, so they understand better the context of what you have explained to us, which I really, really appreciate. First of all, I would like to start with what is the role of the Asian Development Bank on the countries that they are working, okay? In our perspective from the Spanish Embassy in Manila, what we see is that in the 60s, the ADB have, when it began its operations in 1966, the first thing that they find, the ADB is in 1973, they find the oil crisis, okay? So the role of the Asian Development Bank from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s is mostly to provide capital, to bring finance, to be able to work on basic development projects, okay? Then 1997, we have the Asian currency crisis, so we believe that that initial step of providing capital for developing projects is somehow extended. But today's role of the Asian Development Bank is completely different. It's completely different. The ADB, in our perspective, is now becoming a technology partner on those countries where they operate. Okay, why is that? There is a lot of liquidity in Asia. China is going to become economy number one in the next 5-10 years. And just let's see the role of the Asian Development Bank in a key developing country, developing member country like Indonesia. Is less than 1% of the financing that Indonesia is receiving from World Bank, European Union, Asian Development Bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and so on and so forth. So the ADB is working closely to become also a technology partner on the countries that they operate. And this is key. This is key. We need to work in terms of technology. Okay, this is very important. Another element that I wanted to bring to the Spanish companies is why to work with ADB Ventures Fund. Why to work with the Asian Development Bank? First of all, is because now we have, through the PSOD, Private Sector Operations Department, the Private Sector Operations Department, we have the possibility of having a program to finance technology. This is very important. This is something that is new. Okay. Also, because if the technology seems to be successful and seems to be approved by the standards of the ADB, we also can find that that technology might be directly introduced on projects that are financed by the Asian Development Bank. So that is a way for the Spanish company not only to get finance for developing their technology, but also to actually implement that technology on real projects on countries that are actually receiving those projects in the Asian Pacific region. That's very important. Financing the technology, and on top of that, you can actually see that technology be part of one of the developing projects of the ADB. This is key. The implementation of that technology is key, because then you have a real experience behind it. To me, the third most important point of why it's necessary to work with the ADB and ADB Ventures, this is key. In my perspective, this is very important, is that once that you have the ADB on board, financing your technology, financing your company, being part of the providing equity to develop that technology, the Asian Development Bank itself becomes some sort of an ambassador of that technology that you are developing. And this is very important. Why? The ADB has a strong reputation on those countries that they are working. This is very interesting. It has a strong reputation. And as a consequence of that, of the Asian Development Bank becoming some sort of, I wouldn't say your commercial agency, because that's not the role, but it is an ambassador of the technology that you are developing. It is much easier for that Spanish company that wants to work with the Asian Development Bank on this program to be able to access bilaterally those developing members countries that it is true, and you mentioned that sometimes it is very hard to start working with. Okay, so I fully agree with that. So
Jose, sorry to interrupt you, but we are getting some questions from the public, and I wouldn't want to leave them without answer. So if you allow me just a few questions, there is somebody that is asking that if they match with more than one laboratory, could they apply to more than one?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you just go to the website, we should be able to get your, it's a little clearer on the website.
Okay, thank you. And there's another one that is from one of our colleagues that is a representative of ETHEX in the region of Catalonia. He said that they have identified a couple of potential developers, and by that he means that they are startups with a clear, feasible business models, but they lack the financial capacity to address a promising market in Asia unless there is a supportive organization such as ADB Venture Fund. Will that Spanish startup an eligible candidate, or do you expect the Spanish large enterprises to become partners? Is there room for Spanish startups to build alliances through you?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. The criteria I went through in the Fund 1 and our impact and our climate agenda. But this is exactly what we're trying to do, and this is what we call tech transfer. So Spanish companies who have a potential solution with a very clear, feasible business model, but have no idea how to sort of get into the region and need some support, that's fine. We are willing to talk to them. Should they have sort of a partner, a large enterprise or a large sort of investor, even better. But I encourage them to sort of go through the website. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And there are a lot of they congratulate you for the very interesting presentation. And Jason, if you want to say it yourself, I can pass you the micro. I don't know if Sylvia, can you help you?
Thank you, Laura. Thanks very much. No, I just wanted to build upon Saumia's response. She mentioned going through the website is the right way for a Spanish startup to bring themselves to our attention for potential support to expand into Asia Pacific. And I pasted that link in the chat for anybody who would like to access it. I also wanted to mention that one of our labs, our Travel Lab Asia, which focuses on clean tech solutions for the hospitality industry, is actively recruiting startups right now to participate in that program. And we're looking for startups in two categories. One would be building energy solutions, so solutions for energy efficiency in hotels and resorts. And the second would be circular economy solutions, or solutions for managing plastic waste at hotels and resorts. So if there are any Spanish startups that have solutions in those categories, you can actually contact me directly, and I've left my email address in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Jason. Just to be clear, it will be only for those startups offering technologies in that sectors, and the other ones will go through the Enquires channel on your website, isn't it? That's right. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Okay, well, so thank you very much, Sandhya and Jason, for participating and for presenting the fund. It was really interesting. We are just finishing on time. There are no more questions left, so thank you again, you and all the participants, and please send us any other questions that has been left unresolved. And well, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.